And welcome on in to the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe Podcast. He is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey. George, we have said the P word a few times on this show, but it is official. I don't care about this technically being the regular season. Saturday night, standalone game, ESPN, Joe Buck, Troy Aikman on the call, Texans, Colts, Lucas Oil Stadium. It is the first home playoff game in a decade for the Colts. It is happening, George. Let's go. Let's go.
It's at the very least, it's like the first four in Dayton, right? I mean, you may not be in the main proper field, but this is how you get there. I mean, there's no doubt. Everything about this game is the same as a playoff game. If you win, you're moving on to the next round. If you lose, you're going home. I guess the one difference is you can tie this game and you can't tie a postseason game. And I don't want to rule out that outcome because we've seen that between these two teams in the very recent past. But and I'll tell you what, statistically, I mean, you should pick a tie. Vegas basically is. I mean, that will be absolutely insane. But I think the thing that makes me the happiest, we were just talking about playoff scenarios before we started recording. I'm so happy the Colts is simple. I don't want to go through all these crazy, they need this win and a moon phase and 19 other things to happen. Nope. Winning you're in, and that's the kind of math I can handle.
Oh, same. The fact of, yeah. And also, too, Saturday night is going to be very stressful, right? It's again, it's a playoff game. It's been a while since we've been in this situation, especially now at home, fans behind you. It's been a very long time. But with that said, you're right. I think it's even more stressful if you need the Bengals to win, or you need the Ravens to win, or you're relying on a team that maybe has their playoff seeding somewhat sewed up, but maybe not all the way sewed up. So it's like, do you play your starters? Do you rest them? Do you play them at half? Do you play them a quarter? Like you said, very simple. So no math involved, which we love. Keep it nice and easy. Win and you're in. Lose, you go home. Jaguars lose, you win the division. Jaguars win, you make the playoffs as a wild card. Very straightforward. No confusing math, and no stressing about another team that may or may not be playing their starters in what could be a meaningless Week 18 game for them, but one that has a Colts playoff hopes on the line. It's part of the reason why we talk about taking care of your business. And part of the reason why, George, if we go back to the bye week pod, we outlined the final 7 games. You want to make the playoffs, you got to go 5-2. Well, the reason why Saturday night is winning in, George, they so far handle their business and are 4-2 right now out of the first 6 games.
And we said at that time, if you're going to lose one, Atlanta's the one you can afford to lose. And it's because of all these crazy tiebreakers and everything that's going on. It was a non-conference game, and it wouldn't, as bad as that loss was, and as bad as it looks after the Bears just absolutely pants them in Chicago,
Yeah.
it still didn't hurt you as much in the standings as losing to the Raiders obviously would have, or the Titans or any of the other
Or the
conference foes
Steelers.
that they beat along the way. The Steelers, that one's really huge. That Steelers win is why this is a playoff game. Pittsburgh's still very much alive. If Pittsburgh won that game, you'd be in that exact situation you were talking about, hoping that the Ravens backups could beat the Steelers so that you could, actually, I think Steelers would be in. They'd be a game ahead if they had won that game. So, and the Colts couldn't win a tiebreaker. Houston would be alive, and the Colts would be just trying to play spoiler. So, yeah, I mean, that's how important these games are, and were down the stretch. And I think it's something I asked Shane Steichen yesterday, during this stretch where you went 6-2 since the 3-5 start, how much does that help going into this game? Because they've played a lot of at least must-win labeled type of games. It was like the last 4 were all that way. They went 2-2. I think it's a different situation. When we talked about Cincinnati, a lot of these guys hadn't been there. They hadn't experienced anything like this. Now they've been doing nothing but this for a month. So I do think that helps.
You're right. You're right. They are used to it, which is obviously massive too. And the good news is going to Saturday night is they have, again, at least for this week specifically, they've been a lot better home team of late than have been road team, which playoffs is not going to right now, if that doesn't change, do you very well next week. But to get to next week, you got to win on Saturday night. And that now being at home, like you said, it gives you a confidence boost with, I mean, the Texans have been in the same boat, obviously, where you got to win big games down the stretch here because with how wide open the AFC playoff picture has been, you can't really afford a lot of losses, and you see how hairy it gets. The Colts, like we said, like have passed the test up to this point. Bengals loss was disappointing. Falcons loss was very disappointing. But to their credit, they bounced back after every loss so far down the stretch here, have played better at home. And like you said, have put themselves in position winning what felt like playoff games. I mean, we talked about that Steelers game feeling like a playoff game. Similar situation where it's a standalone game that the entire nation is watching, which has not happened a lot, obviously, for this team this year. And they responded tremendously at home with a national audience after a slow first quarter, punch the Steelers in the mouth for the last three. And like I said, won a game that now makes this game on Saturday night a playoff game. That is one thing we've talked about it a ton, but I don't think we're overstating it or can really beat a dead horse enough because it's so impressive for how young this team is, George. For the most part, they don't let the moment, the pressure, the spotlight impact them.
No, that's what's been really impressive. I mean, you've seen them fall flat, but I think that's been more just performance than nerves. I mean, you go to Cincinnati, they couldn't stop the screen. I mean, it was that simple. You tackle the running back against the Bengals, it's a different game. Who knows how the outcome is? Colts might be controlling the division right now. And then you go to Atlanta, and they just played their worst game of the year. In all facets. I mean, they just did not take care of business anywhere in that game. And that happens in this league. I mean, you go through every team in this league is going to go point at least one game and say, for the Colts, it's that one, I would think. Go down there and you're completely uncompetitive on Christmas Eve. You win that game. You're sitting in the 4 seed right now. You could go, I think, as high as 3. You'd be feeling really, really good about, your chances and how things are going moving forward. If you're the Texans, they've got to be wondering how they lost to Carolina. You go back to that game, you beat Carolina right now. You're the Texans. You control the AFC South. That kind of thing, I think every team in the league can go and point to that. And that's why I think, these young guys, especially Sunday, it's always in this league, what have you done for me lately? You go out there against the Raiders, a team that was desperate because they were eliminated with a loss. Close game throughout, and the Colts led throughout, but it was never more than, I think, a 10-point difference. The 11 at one point was 14-3.
14-3.
And Raiders were right there with them throughout the entire second half. And the Colts are able to, find a way to win that game and get not shut down the Raiders, but get a couple stops late that really matter. I mean, that last touchdown really didn't, it was not good to see them go and give it up, but it really didn't affect much. You knew you're just gonna have to recover an onside kick and take a knee and win the game. So, and even if you didn't recover the onside kick, they were going to need a lot of help, although field goal range wasn't that far away, but it was a playoff atmosphere last week. And you had Devontae Adams over there, who is, besides having a Taco Bell in his house, is obviously the one of, if not the best receiver in the NFL. Probably got a little lucky without Josh Jacobs playing, but you had to deal with Max Crosby. You had to deal with Malcolm Kuntz. There were things the Raiders do that can cause a lot of trouble, and that was a hot team coming in on back-to-back wins. And I think in their mind, hey, you know what? We're hosting the Super Bowl. We're going to win out. We're going to get in the playoffs. We're going to, see what happens. You ended all that. Now, here comes a Houston team on paper very similar to the Colts. There's a lot of things that have gone the same way this year for both those teams. Obviously, Colts won the first meeting down in Houston, and that feels like it was a decade ago. And now you're going to, I think for me, the biggest thing, and I kind of want your thoughts on this, to go back to last year and how meaningless that game was, to where people weren't even sure the Texans wanted to win it because if they lose, they get the number 1 overall pick. And now, same 2 teams, same week of the season, same stadium, and like you said, primetime TV, Joe Buck, Troy Aikman. They weren't here last year. I don't know why, but it's gonna be. It's gonna be that stark difference to me is tells you everything about these 2 teams and the jobs that D'Amico Ryans and Shane Steichen have done this year.
Like you said, these 2 teams, it's very fitting because they are very similar have had a lot of success in similar ways, obviously with different personnel, with CJ Stroud lighting it up for a large part of the year, and the Colts getting a lot of contributions from everyone on the roster. But also, like, I think what should make you feel good right now going to this game on Saturday night, to go back to the Raiders game on Sunday for one last time, is what you said about Vegas coming in. They were a hot team, and they just went into Arrowhead. They pushed the Chiefs around. They kicked the crap out of the defending champs. They kicked the crap out of a team that's owned them and that division for years. So like, it's not, you can't minimize that win. They went in there and dominated Patrick Mahomes, turned him over, won the game, controlled the whole game. And so, like you said, if you're the Raiders, you said, well, we just won this game. Like all of a sudden now, like this could snowball in and we could get hot. And the Colts coming off of an embarrassing and arguably maybe the worst loss of the season in Atlanta. They put the brakes to that momentum Vegas had. They stuffed them right away, got out to a 14-3 lead, and never let the Raiders get that momentum back. And even when they did in the second half, still kept themselves at arm's length for the entire game, to where you needed a 1% percentage play in the onside kick to go their way. Like that never, the onside kick, if you need an onside kick to keep your game, the game and the season alive, it's over. It's over. It's like 1 in a million at this point with the rules. And so the Colts put themselves in a position where, yes, like you said, defensively you want to stand. But really, they put themselves in a position where no matter what happened on that final drive for Vegas, it was coming down to a 99% chance play that was in favor of the Colts. They put themselves in a position to where they could win and not need something crazy to happen. And also, that's now the same as when you're in on Saturday night. They put themselves in a position where you don't need help. It's in your hands. But I think that's really impressive of the way Vegas is coming to this game, because like you said, Houston is going to come in confident and hot as well. And the Colts did an A+ job at stopping that momentum right away and not letting the Raiders get hot or continue to snowball their good play into this game.
Oh, absolutely. I the numbers that are just kind of incredible with the Raiders going into that game. 7 takeaways and 4 defensive touchdowns in the 2 games prior to this one, and we've seen this offense play into that. There was definitely a version of Sunday's games where the Colts turned the ball over a lot, the Raiders got defensive scores, and they walked out of there with a win. But the Colts offense never really even put the ball in harm's way. They had the one fumble that Pittman fell on immediately, and that's it. I mean, outside of that, there I don't remember Minshew really throwing a ball that looked like that's trouble. He had one of his better days. I mean, his yards per attempt was way up. That's something I really pay attention to. Is 9.7, which is really really good number. And he had good balance. I think he threw it 24 times. They ran the ball 20 odd times as well. So I think it was a really good offensive performance, and that's been the difference between home and road right now. The last couple road games, Cincinnati, Atlanta, the offense couldn't get anything going. And you get back into Lucas Oil Stadium for whatever reason, the run game comes back to life. It's really good against Steelers, really solid against the Raiders. And Minshew's played better with that run game. I mean, that there's no big secret to that. The better the run game does, the better he tends to be. That I think is what you got going for you on Sunday. But I also think, or Saturday. I always want to say Sunday, but this time it's Saturday night. Got to remind myself of that. I also think it's going to be interesting to watch what happens around the rest of the AFC. We knew all year that this was going to be a really interesting week because those ties. I mean, certainly since the bye week, the number of teams that were tied for the wild card and tied in the division, you knew it was going to be a really crazy scenario in week 18. Colts, like I said, have the easy one. Steelers are still alive in all of this. They need to beat the Ravens backups earlier Saturday, and then they can cause damage. The Jaguars, there's a scenario if Pittsburgh wins, or if I believe Buffalo wins, where the Jaguars are out with a loss. So they may be in do or die as well, depending on what happens on Saturday. They can obviously win the division if they beat Tennessee. Buffalo, Miami is going to have a huge impact on the Colts because if the Colts don't win the division, that game will determine where the Colts go in the wild card round. It's I think there's something like 12 games this weekend or something like that across the league that have some kind of impact on the playoff picture. If you're Roger Goodell, this is how you draw it up.
Oh, absolutely. The final season, like you said, so many moving pieces, so many games that, like I said, have an impact on either making or missing the playoffs. Where your seeding is going to be, even though the number one seed in the bye is locked up in both conferences, still a lot to play for and a lot of positioning, especially too in both conferences. It's truly wide open. And so, like, if you are right now any team, let's say in the top a division leader or trying to win your division, I think you are thinking about seeding and lining up and trying to be in a spot and picking, your path because it is open. And honestly, like, yeah, I mean, right now you look at like if you're a team right now, whether it's the Dolphins, I mean, right now it's locked in the AFC South. It's going to play the Browns, but if that wasn't the case, like I think you're trying to angle yourself away from Cleveland right now with how hot they're playing. But also, do you want Buffalo coming to town? If the Bills lose on Sunday night, now they're coming to your building next week. That's a tough game. Like it's open. It is wide open. Like I said, there's so many different possibilities that we could see play out here, and the playoff picture is so fluid with just one game left for each team. Speaking of which, let's get a little ahead of ourselves here, George. Let's assume for a second the Colts make the playoffs, right? We'll obviously break it down on Thursday a lot more, but let's just say Saturday night, almost said Sunday night, Saturday night, Colts win. Colts win, they're in. Now, obviously, like we said, Sunday they could win the division if the Jaguars lose. But if the Colts win on Saturday night, they're really, tell me if I'm wrong here. I did the math. There are 4 teams the Colts could play possibly. They are either the Dolphins, no water, Browns, Chiefs, Bills. Those are the 4 opponents Colts could play in the wild card weekend, depending on if they win the division or if they do make it as a wild card team. Out of those 4, Chiefs, Bills, Dolphins, Browns, who's the team you're circling right now saying, I want to play them? I think that's the team the Colts have the best chance of beating next week.
Oddly enough, Kansas City. I mean, I don't know if I would have said that anywhere in the last 3 or 4 years, but
what a year we're living in. What a year. I want the Chiefs.
This season. That's the NFL this season. I mean, you don't really want to go to Arrowhead this time of year. I mean, you saw them find a way to scrap it out and beat Cincinnati. But again, the week right before that, they couldn't get it done against the Raiders at home. It's going to be, I'm sure, an crazy atmosphere if it comes down to that. Taylor Swift will be there. There'll be, unbelievable amount of attention on that game. But you just watch the way the receivers have played for Kansas City really all year long. And the fact that defense seems to be wearing down a little bit. And I think I take my chances more with them than, say, a Cleveland team that's been red hot. That Joe Flacco looks like, he dipped in the fountain of youth or something and is out here making plays for them every week. You really don't want to face Miami. I think that's the team that is, and it's the team they have the least chance to play, and probably the team they really match up the worst against, just because Tyreek Hill in that offense against Colts right now, probably not a matchup that you really want to get into. And then, Buffalo would be interesting. The Colts have had good success recently against Buffalo. I'm sure they still have a little bit PTSD and don't really want to see Jonathan Taylor out there again. Having dealt with him in a couple of years ago in that 5 touchdown game up there. But, I'd probably go Chiefs, Bills, Browns, Dolphins if I had to rank them.
Do you know? Because you're right. Going to Arrowhead this time of the year is never easy. Chiefs are 10-6 this year. Do you know what their home record is?
It can't be good because I feel like they've lost a few there.
5-4.
Yes, that's not good.
5-4.
Buffalo beat them there. Obviously Raiders just beat them there. The Denver beat them there. Or was that game in Denver?
I think it was in Denver. Lions early in the year beat them there
on a drop pass.
The Bills, the infamous offsides.
Yeah, I mean That's the other thing. You don't know if they'll line up correctly. I mean, there's a lot of things that go your way. Now, I mean, it's playoffs, so there's no such thing as just walking in there and okay, we got this and we're gonna move on. But I think matchup wise, you look at the Kansas City game, you say, okay, well, even if the receivers are open, they might not catch the ball. And you can get some pressure on Patrick Mahomes, and then Jonathan Taylor can run the ball and have a vintage game there, get a big shot at some point. It's easy to create a scenario. Not saying that the Colts would be favored or that the Colts would win, no doubt, but it's easy to create a scenario where they win that game, as opposed to, and even with Cleveland, like, okay, you're at home. That's always a good thing. Again, Taylor running the ball would have to be a big part of it, but Joe Flacco might throw you a couple interceptions, get some short fields. Okay, you can draw up that scenario. What's the scenario for beating Miami?
I don't have one. I'm with you, by the way. I'll give my answer in a second. Who I rather play the most, the least. I'm lockstep. Out of the four, the team I do not want to see next Saturday or Sunday is the Dolphins. How you slowing down Tyreek Hill? How you slowing down Jalen Waddle? How you slowing down Raheem Mostert? George, I mean, that game in Baltimore was ugly. I don't care. I think it's more on the Ravens and how impressive they are than, the Dolphins being total frauds. But even if you are in the camp of the Dolphins being total frauds, can't beat good teams, Colts are nowhere near on that level where they could match up with the speed, let alone that Miami has those three players. I'm with you. I don't see a path to victory there, that whatsoever. I don't see a path to keeping them under 40.
No, it'll be tough. That matchup is really not good. Most is the exact kind of running back the Colts have trouble with. Tyreek Hill's the exact kind of receiver the entire league has trouble with. And then you got Waddle on the other side. So it's like, even if somehow you get enough people on, I don't know, line somebody up at the goal line on Hill so that there's not an opening, you still dealing with Jalen Waddle. That one doesn't that doesn't look good on paper.
I'm with you. That is not exciting whatsoever to play the Dolphins and all that speed. My answer, I think, would be the Browns, in part because you're at home, but also in part because what you said, Joe Flacco will give you some. He's been tremendous. What has he made? He's made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 starts, 13 touchdown passes in 5 starts. It's been impressive. With that said, though, does have 8 interceptions. And so we know this Colts defense, right? They do struggle when they're not getting sacks and turnovers. That offensive line is banged up for Cleveland. Now, they've been doing a great job despite that, or I guess in spite of the injuries on the offensive line, of still keeping Joe upright and still having offensive success. But Joe is he's giving it to you if you could take it. I think he has an interception. Let me see. Yeah, at least one interception in every game he's played so far. So you could think you can at least get a turnover. You should be able to run the ball decently. And that Browns team and defense has been different on the road compared to home, where they've been world beaters at home. And as we saw, at this point, it feels like ages ago. I mean, controversial, obviously, but also the Colts did put up 38 points against Cleveland. And so offensively, they made a lot of tons of chunk plays, huge explosive plays in the pass game, in the run game. They had success where I do think that, with how the Browns have played on the road, being a home game for the Colts, and the fact that Joe Flacco gives you turnovers, I think wild card weekend best chance would be winning the division and playing the Browns. But if that's one, I think two is the Chiefs. I'm with you. 1, 2 for me is Browns, Chiefs, just because, like you said, right now, Kansas City offensively, you can't trust them to figure it out. And even if you can't cover a receiver, like you mentioned, you can't trust them to catch the ball. So that's also a huge added bonus as well. And that defense, for how well it played in the first half of the year, is starting to get leaky. I'm sure it's getting tired because that offense for Kansas City is not exactly lighting up the scoreboard, having a ton of long drives and moving it a ton. So they've been on the field a lot, getting worn down. That Colts offense, I think, can wear them down. And George, look, I know history doesn't really help you in games like this. Especially when we first started going back to 2018. I get it. The sample size is massive. But the Colts, in the 3 games they played against Patrick Mahomes, 2-1. 2-1, George, including 1 win in Arrowhead.
They're 0-1 in the playoffs, though, against them.
They are.
That would be a big. That would be a big indicator there as well. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. It's one of those things where honestly you're happy whoever you're playing because you're there. And I think going into the year, you never really envision that. Um, and so now, you know, getting any opponent next week, I think is huge for this team. It's interesting though, because I think the one thing I think that's very regrettable, if there is such thing about this season, is just it goes back to what's been that way since it happened. The fact that Richardson's not experiencing all of this, that you don't have your rookie quarterback. I mean, can you imagine this game on Saturday night and it's Stroud versus Richardson? I mean, maybe next year.
Maybe next year. I hope next year, George. I hope next year, but that's part of like it sucks and it is disappointing. But I think it's also like now that he's obviously out for the year, you can't do anything about that. That's why this game is so massive for the Colts and why these games down the stretch have been massive because, like you said, it's valuable experience, win or lose, just valuable experience to be in a playoff atmosphere and to learn what it's like to take your game to the next level when your opponent is raising their level of play in a game that is so impactful for both sides. But if you're not going to get Richardson that opportunity to experience that, the next best thing you can do is have everybody else on the roster experience that. And so it's still like we've been talking about, it's not a wasted year in the sense that, oh, well, Richardson's not playing, so who cares? Getting this young team with a lot of these guys offensively and defensively that are going to be the core of your team the next 5 years, getting them this playoff experience, bare minimum, I'm hoping at least next year and after that helps, kind of, high tide raises all ships. I hope that playoff experience for Michael Pittman Jr., for Alec Pierce, for Jonathan Taylor, for guys on the offensive line, for Josh Downs can help raise the boat of Richardson to where if he's in the situation, hopefully next year where he's in a big time game, he's not as maybe jittery, he's not as nervous, or he's more confident than maybe he should be because everyone else around him has been through the fire. And hopefully on Saturday night, if they win, means they get through it and accomplish the mission of making the playoffs. Everyone else around him getting in that fire zone, if you will, and coming out the other side, I think will still help Richardson's development, even though he's not playing in these games specifically.
And he's been in these meetings and he's been at practice and he's taking in a lot of this atmosphere and what's gone on. And I think that's also beneficial to him because it's not going to be new to him. It's going to be new to him maybe on the field, but it's not going to be new to him from a preparation standpoint. You talk to most of the players, that's what they really take the most. That getting the practice week, getting everything going, studying that defense. And I think also Gardner has raised a nice bar for him. I mean, yeah, there's been moments where his play needs to be better, and I think we'll all admit that. That he's cost them in some games. Tends to hold on to the ball too much at times, but also his overall numbers: 15 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. No one's going to take that, and put him in the MVP conversation. But for a backup quarterback making what will end up being 13 starts, those aren't bad numbers at all. About 3,500 yards plus whatever he does on Saturday night. It's a nice like foundation. It's a good level. Okay, AR, here's what you got to play too, because you got this from Gardner Minshew. You got to at least do that. I mean, I think we talk a lot about everything AR is going to add to this team next year with his athleticism and his arm, but you know, somebody said that only Tua has more 50-yard completions this year than Gardner Minshew. So I mean, there's been some. I think you do have to tip your cap to Gardner in terms of when you look at the backups around the league and what's happening. Obviously, Joe Flacco is doing a great job in Cleveland. I think Jake Browning, even though the Bengals fell short, did a great job in Cincinnati, gave them much more life, much more hope. All of a sudden, Mason Rudolph has become a big part of Pittsburgh staying alive. There's a lot of backups playing well around this league, but I think you do have to tip your cap to Gardner because none of them have done it as long as he has. He's been the starter essentially the whole season. I mean, he finished a lot of those 4 games that Richardson was able to start. So, for him to be able to play at that level, hats off to him. But I also think that helps you next year because if he was playing poorly, I don't know Richardson could take as much from it. But you can watch now and say, okay, in this situation, maybe he didn't make the right play, but look at how he prepared during the week. Look at the totality of that game. There's a lot I think that Richardson's going to be able to take from that and build off of next year.
And to Shane's credit too, the offense hasn't changed that much where it's like you're watching it and it's like, okay, well, that's the Gardner offense and he's having success in it. But next year it's going to be a total 180 in terms of how it's going to look. I mean, minus Minshew keeping it on an RPO, right? Because that's basically, it's not an RPO, it's a handoff. And the only RPO would be, or I guess really that's, zone read is handoff. But the RPO game is still, Minshew's doing a good job of either handing it off or pulling it and making a quick pop pass. But outside of Richardson keeping the ball on a zone read himself, and maybe the RPO including his legs on top of handing the ball off and on top of passing the ball, the offense is the same for the most part. And so, like I said, it is a great baseline, and also it's a great indicator of, look, number one, how good the RPO game is for the Colts going forward, where even if Gardner Minshew is running it, like that's his most efficient play, and that's the most efficient he's been when those plays are called. So it's like, if that's working for him, just like I said, it's almost a plug and play. I think then how well with Richardson and the threat he is to run the ball, if defenses are still having a tough time slowing down this Colts offense when Minshew is running the RPO, imagine what this is going to look like this time next year when you have that freak of an athlete back there who can rocket the ball 60 yards, who can hand it off to an all-pro caliber running back, or can keep it himself, go around the other side, outrun everyone on your defense, and maybe make a house call himself. The possibilities are endless, but it also all goes back to, like you said, you can project success, number one, because Gardner Minshew is doing it, and number two is because the offense next year, again, some tweaks, obviously, but for the most part, 75% of the offense we're seeing this year with Gardner Minshew running it is going to be the offense next year.
Yeah, I think that's going to be fun to see. But I there's a lot of talk about, well, Shane has a good record and the offense has gone well, but the schedule's been weak, which it has. No one's going to deny that. The schedule's been weak. That's been more on the offensive side. That's been about backup quarterbacks, about offenses that can't get it done. They played some pretty good defenses this year. They played a lot of top 10 defenses this year. And again, going back to what you were saying about, them being able to do it with a backup quarterback against those offenses, and with JT in and out of the lineup, Braden Smith in and out of the lineup, you get better health next year. This offense, I think, legitimately can be not just a top 10 offense, maybe a top 5 offense. You get Braden Smith for an entire year, you get Jonathan Taylor for an entire year, and you get 17 games from Anthony Richardson. Things are going to look a lot different on that side of the ball. And I think that's something that, as if you can make the playoffs this year, like you said, and get that experience and grow through this offseason, add some pieces to this defense, maybe add a couple more weapons to the offense, there's reason to believe they can take a big step forward. It's dangerous in the NFL because every year is so different than the year before it. But I think the optimism level around here, no matter what happens Saturday, honestly, should be really, really high.
I'm just counting really fast here. If you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 of the top 11 teams in terms of points per game allowed in the NFL, the Colts have played this year. So you're 100% right. They've gotten some meatballs in terms of opposing offenses they've played. But like you said, they have played some of the best defenses in the league and they have done enough, right? They have done enough to win games with a backup quarterback. And for what, 70% of the season, they were a top 10 scoring offense. I mean, they've fallen. Right now. They are. So you know what? I sold them short.
I just went to check. They're 10th right now.
So they've been a top 10 scoring offense with Gardner Minshew playing basically all but one game this year. And you faced on the other side 7 of the top 11 scoring defenses. Like it's not a fluke in that sense offensively. Yes, the schedule's been weak. And part of the reason why we started about halfway through the year kind of looking at, well, this team can make the playoffs. It wasn't because of like, oh, this team is just so talented. It's because the schedule was very favorable. And they had, I think, had what the last 7 games. I think they had the easiest 7 games of any team
Oh
down the
yeah.
stretch. So they are absolutely the beneficiaries of an easier schedule compared to other teams. But with that said, George, defensively, they played some really tough teams and have scored and have looked solid, we'll say, doing so. And you know what? Also, they've taken care of business, which again, this year, how many teams have flubbed games, have given games away to teams they shouldn't? I mean, the Colts have done that as well, don't get me wrong, but nowhere near at the level we've seen from some of the better teams in the league. And so they deserve credit for that as well, for taking care of business against what has been a softer schedule.
That's why I think, yes, the schedule's going to be harder next year. But you also don't know how things are going to play out as far as what goes on everywhere else. But it will be, because you're going to be playing what, a second or third place schedule, maybe a first place schedule, depending
Maybe
on
first place.
how things go. But it's defense should get better just because they're going to be a year older. I mean, a lot of the problems that you're seeing with defense this year is youth. You got a lot of rookies out there. You got a lot of second year guys who are basically rookies. Nick Cross, for all intents and purposes, is a rookie. You
Yeah.
can, yeah, he was here last year, but he didn't play a ton. He wasn't a full time starter. He's not a guy that has a year under his belt in experience. Look at secondary on Saturday night. I mean, you had two rookies at corner. You had Chris Lamont, who's been a special teams guy, moving in to the slot. You had Nick Cross at one safety, who is, again, basically a rookie. And your other safety was Ronnie Harrison, who's played linebacker all year. I mean, and they went out. They did not shut down Devontae Adams. I'm not going to
No.
say that because it did not happen. But he averaged 9.7 yards per reception. That's not bad against that guy who's can, absolutely take top off the defense. That's huge, and I think when you look at things like that, there's reason to believe this defense can improve, that they can get better, and they can have a better year. The offense should improve if it's healthy. And their 10th ranked offense right now. We just mentioned 3 key players who missed at least 7 games each, between Taylor, Smith, and Richardson. You get those guys out there together, it's a different look. It's going to be, but I think the one thing, and this matters Saturday, and it will matter next year, special teams is 30th in DVOA. I don't know, how much you put into that. I think it's a really good stat. I think it's a big, and it's interesting to look at the Indianapolis-Houston comparison right now, because I think the Colts are 13th offensively there, which is really close to the top 10 in DVOA as well. And Houston's 14th. And defensively, Houston's 17th and Indy's 18th. So they're right there. But special teams, Houston's 9th and Indy is 30th. And I think you saw it Saturday with the penalty on the punt. EJ Speed just lets that punt go. The Colts are not sweating out the end of the game quite the way that they were. And you've seen that, I think, in most games. There's been some return that shouldn't have happened, where there's free yardage for somebody, or, missed kick, or what. There's just been little special teams, and sometimes not so little special teams gaffes that have aided the opponent. I think that's another area. Can you improve that next year? That hidden yardage. So for as much as all this is a long way of me saying, yes, it was an easy schedule this year, and they took advantage of it. But there are things about this team that should make it be able to stand up to a harder schedule in the future.
You're right. It's not like this is like the ceiling for this team, and like their record is mostly based on easy schedule. Once they play a harder schedule, this team's not going to get much better, and their wins are going to go down. You're right. They could win 10 games this year. Schedule gets harder, but the team gets better, and they could easily next year roll out and win 10 games again. Even if they, let's say, win the division and then next year play a first place schedule, you're 100% right. If Richardson can stay healthy, number one, develop the way we think he can develop from the small sample size we saw in his rookie year moving forward, you clean up a special teams that thankfully can only get better, not really get any worse. Defensively, like you said, get some experience, especially in the back end. The front end's done an A+ job this season. Like I said, the back end gets some much needed experience, and now these guys are just going to get their feet wetted. And imagine the confidence going to next year for Juju Brents, for Jalen Jones, for Nick Cross. If they can make the playoffs, playing a playoff game, slow CJ Stroud down on Saturday night. Imagine the confidence, George, this time next year they're going to be playing with when they, again, it goes back to what we said before about having these guys face big time moments, face adversity like they're facing right now on Saturday with a chance to go to the playoffs. If you come out the other side and win this game, just forget about winning a playoff game. You win on Saturday night, which is a playoff game at home. Don't care what happens next week. The confidence this team is going to have at so many key positions next year, it's going to be off the charts. Where again, next year we could be talking about still some rookie bumps. And next year, for all intents and purposes, we could probably still call AR a rookie next year. But with that said, imagine if he now does not have to go out there and be the hero. And all of a sudden now he can rely in a game on the secondary to maybe limit a high-flying passing attack because they have the confidence, and now all of a sudden they are playing really well and healthy. And now all of a sudden, if you're AR, you don't need to go out there and score 30 points. You could score 21 and win. Like, that's what we're talking about, George, when it comes to like gaining confidence and these games meaning something for the rest of the roster, even though the quarterback is not the one that's going to be in these pressurized situations and not learning on the field, at least what it takes to win big time games like this. But this is where everyone else, if you could come through next year and years going past that, it could pay dividends winning this game on Saturday night alone.
No, it's huge. And I think one of the hidden things in all of this, when you're talking about AR, and earlier we were talking about him not getting the experience and how much that is probably the big regret of all this. Like, everything takeaway from this year should be positive no matter what happens Saturday, because you showed that you can compete. You showed that the future is bright. I think kind of the hidden thing in all of this that's good, Juju Brent's returning for that Steelers game and being a part of this stretch run, whether they get in or they don't, all that you were just talking about, the confidence of this secondary, him being out there, being a part of this, going against Davante Adams in a huge game last week, going against CJ Stroud this week in a huge game. That's only going to make him better. And I think that's a huge thing. Your second round pick, a guy that they have a lot of optimism with, has come out and now gets a chance to play in really important football games down the stretch after missing so much time this year with injuries. That's huge.
Massive. And even just going to this game, like you said, the stats jump out at you and look very impressive for Davante Adams. But we both agree, like, it never felt like Davante took over the game. And the touchdown catch was incredible. The second touchdown catch in the corner. Again, we talked about it. It's unstoppable. That's just one where you watch and you're in awe of a great player making a great play. But the drive before that, where the Raiders, when the Colts are up 10 and the Raiders were driving the ball right down the field and had to settle for a field goal. Third down, they targeted Davante Adams on an out route, what it felt like for the 100th time on that drive in a row. And Jalen Jones made a play. And it's one of those things where it's like, you can get beat. Juju, excuse me. My apologies. You're right. Juju made a play. And it's one of those things where you can get beat. But it's like, it's cliche, but it's true when you're a corner. If you have that short memory, that is like, you look back, George, that is one of the biggest plays of the game. You keep right now 7 off the board. You force the Raiders to go down and have to score. You still keep it, even though the Raiders kicked a field goal, the Colts then go down and kick their own field goal. So you still keep it a 2-possession game there, no matter, and allow this team to stay within arm's reach of the lead. That is one of those great plays where, again, you just keep fighting. And I think that's like growth right there in that very moment. And now you look ahead, like Nico Collins is having a tremendous year for the Texans. Mm-hmm. He's not the Davante Adams. So even though Davante toasted him, they never really allowed him to take over the game. And now you can at least, like, it's crazy to say, but even though Davante had 2 touchdowns and over 160 yards, 13 catches, you could still be confident coming out of that game, going to this one of, well, we did a good job on Davante. Now it's Nico Collins. No disrespect to him, but he's not Davante Adams. We can have confidence. We could shut down this passing attack.
I need it. I mean, Nico had a huge game in week 2. I think he had 7 catches, 146 yards. I was looking up the other day. Now, Juju Brents didn't play that day. Jalen Jones didn't play that day. It was a completely different secondary. Julian Blackmon did play and won't be here. I mean, literally, I don't think anybody, unless Kenny Moore's back, which we talk about that here in a minute, unless Kenny Moore is back, I don't think anybody who started in the secondary that game for the Colts will start in the secondary on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna go back and rewatch the game, and I still might, George, from
Mhm.
week 2. But it truly is like on both sides for the Colts and the Texans,
Mhm.
night and day from where that game and both these teams were back in week 2 to where they are now in week 18. You're 100% right. And if I remember correctly, not that it was garbage time, but a lot of that was in the second half when the Colts
Mhm.
felt like took the foot off the gas a little bit and were playing basically prevent defense, and you had Nico covering them up, which, yes, it still looks, still a nice day stat wise for him. But at least in terms of context, came when,
Mhm.
for the most part, the game was in control, which, like I said, is at least a little bit of a good confidence boost. But you mentioned it too. That's the injuries, that is, to wrap up the pod here, George. Sorry.
Mhm.
But that is the one thing where I don't know about yourself. I'm excited for a Saturday night game. Nation's watching, standalone primetime game. Joe Buck on the call. What a world we're living in. But with that said, the short week is not exactly ideal for Kenny Moore, who was a no-go on Sunday because of a back. I mean, and George, we're recording this on Tuesday morning, so we'll obviously get updates along the way, but at least Monday availability, and even we didn't talk about it a lot on Sunday, but even Sunday, was anything mentioned about Jonathan Taylor? Did not finish the end of the game. Is at the injury tent at some point, but did not seem like anyone was concerned about an injury. Obviously, we'll watch Kenny Moore, but is there any sort of update or things to report on with JT?
No, he was in a blue tent at least once during the game. There was a report at some point that they were looking at his wrist on the sideline or taping up his wrist or something on the sideline. I don't know if that might have been related to the thumb. It's hard to say. But they never reported anything during the game. There was never an announcement on him. The only announcement during the game was Ryan Kelly, who obviously came back in and finished and, was able to talk to us after the game and also seemed okay. But he'll be one to watch as well to see, because you never know how that's going to react. Sometimes adrenaline gets you through the game, and then
Sure.
you come out in the week and it's a little bit different. Um, but JT, there was no announcement ever on any kind of treatment for him, and he was the first guy to talk in the locker room after the game, so he wasn't getting treatment. I mean, I can say that much. I don't know, they didn't go back in later. But normally the guys that are banged up in the game are in the training room. You don't get them for a little while. He was there right away, um, and didn't. Now, granted, he didn't say anything after the game in which the thumb injury cropped up either. So all this has caveats. But there's been no indication as of Tuesday morning that there's anything there. Now we'll find out. Going to have availability pretty soon. I'm sure progressing well, and we'll see. Will be used a lot, but so far, sounds like JT should be a go. Um, the big questions I think are going to be Ryan Kelly and obviously Kenny Moore. There's some optimism with Kenny because he was testing out the back, working out before the game, so he was close on Sunday, which at least gives you some hope. That I think the Colts are hopeful that he'll be able to rest this week, and that'll get him back to where he needs to be, and he can go. Obviously, that'd be hugely important against this opponent, but I think that's it. I mean, Braden Smith looks like he's been through a war, and has literally given this team everything he's got. But he played that game and didn't come out, so you assume that he's going to be good to go as well. I think Quentin Nelson also got banged up, missed one snap, but I don't think there's anything there. It's week 18. At this point, if you can go, you will, and I think everyone's going to be in that. There is no week 19 unless you make it happen.
You're right about that. And I can't lie. I definitely been checking my phone the last few minutes here to see any Jonathan Taylor update, because this feels very
Mhm.
eerily similar, outside of us being kind of having our antennas up whatsoever after the Bucks game, of after the game, JT's there, right? I mean, you said you talked to him after the game against Tampa, seemed fine, good spirits. All of a sudden, Tuesday morning, boom, out for a few weeks with a thumb injury that popped out of nowhere. So I hope, George, we hear from Shane Steichen on Tuesday, progressing well, nothing to see here, because at least that's no answer. No answer is better than an answer, because the last time we got an answer, it was, yeah, he's out for a few weeks. So at least if we hear the classic Shane isms, that's a win, George. I'll take it.
That will be a positive, if that's what happens here. So far, there's been nothing reported from the team. But again, that hasn't always held up when it comes to JT. And we'll see. He's not T.Y. Hilton, but he's got a really good history against the Texans. So I think that'll be an interesting part of this game as well. He missed that game in week 2, obviously. Like I said, these two teams are demonstrably different than they were. And it would be even if there wasn't so much personnel change, but they're literally different teams in terms of who's on the field for them, versus week 2 and now. So, going to be really interesting. I think, like we said on Sunday, biggest week of the Blue Horseshoe Pod in the history of this pod. So, you definitely want to sign up now. Now is the time to jump on board, a playoff game on Saturday. It doesn't have the title, but in every other way, this is a playoff game on Saturday night.
Playoff game, win, and you're in. Now, it does get interesting because there are definitely a few scenarios where tie and you're in. But hey, it could be a fun one. Basically, like I said, biggest game in Blue Horseshoe Pot history. First home playoff game for the Colts since 2014 when they played the Bengals. Let's go, George. Let's go. Like you said, no better time than right now to subscribe on YouTube, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We got a massive Texans preview coming on Thursday. Get you jacked up, get you set, get you to know what to watch for when it comes to 8:15 on Saturday night. You will be ready. I promise you that. I promise you that. Oh, George, it's only Tuesday. For most people, it feels, including myself, it feels like Monday, which is,
Does feel
I
like
mean,
Monday.
it's exciting because it's already a short week that even now just got shorter. So, I mean, that should get you through the week alone. It's a playoff game, and already it feels like a Monday, but it's a Tuesday. This new year, George, is off to a great start. 2024, man. Let's go. Let's
Gonna be insane.
go.
Gonna be insane. They got to walk through today and practices Wednesday and Thursday, and then it's go time. And I think that's gonna be, like I said, to me, that's the most fun thing. There's no way, and I said it back in August. There's no way I expected to be dealing with something like that at the end of the year this year. I think no matter what happens Saturday night, you got to consider Shane Steichen's first year a tremendous success, and hats off to this entire roster. I mean, you talk about Gardner earlier and how he stepped up, but this has really been a season where every guy has contributed. And so I think, the fact that this has been a real team, hats off to them. And Saturday should be a blast.
We'll end with a little honesty corner question here. Be honest, George. Did you have to cancel plans for next week?
I did not.
Did you have to cancel a vacation?
I did not, because I never go that far. But yeah, I mean, it, if there had been something come up, I probably would have gone ahead and scheduled it and said, yeah, it won't be there won't be any need to worry about that. That's after the season. Nope. Here we are, sitting here with a chance for the Colts to go to the postseason. I'll call it a play-in game. How's that? Because that's what it absolutely is. You win this game, you're part of the tournament, and you lose it, you're going home. But with a winning record. I mean, that alone, I think, was beating the odds.
That is true. Yeah, I mean, 9 wins. Let's just round up and say they've doubled both of our projections already easily this season. Definitely, like I said, definitely did not expect to be talking about and still breaking down games, let's say, on the pod at this time of the year. But here we are, and history is here for us to make, George, right here on the podcast. The 2 biggest pods we have ever had right now in the history of the Short Lift podcast are coming up Thursday and after the game. So you better be subscribing and liking and listening and watching, because history is getting made on the Blue Horseshoe Pod. And hopefully we see George this season continue Saturday night, Lucas Oil Stadium. Hopefully it's a party. Because let me tell you, nothing I want more than to be sitting on my couch at 1 o'clock on Sunday, cheering on my hated rival, the damn Tennessee Titans and Mike Vrabel. I've never wanted in my life to be more of a Mike Vrabel fan than I will be on Sunday at 1 o'clock if the Colts take care of business on Saturday night. Let's go.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. You rooting for the Titans. That I never thought I'd see that day either. So Colts can make it happen Saturday night.
Let's go, Derrick Henry. Oh, so many nightmares, but now all of a sudden he's my best friend. Oh, this season has been wacky to say the least, and that'll be a very fitting ending to a 2023 season that's been anything right now but how we thought. Oh, well, I'm sure it's been rough on the first day back of the new year. So hopefully it made your first day back a little bit more enjoyable. Appreciate you joining us right here on the Blue Horseshoe Pod. We will be back Thursday. Get you set for Colts Texans. Talk to you then. Have a great rest of your week.